federal government is getting the old team back together to review everything government does. A former Howard minister, a former Howard economic advisor and a former coalition staffer and Howard government departmental secretary are part of the Commission of Audit. It will be headed by the Business Council Chief, Tony Shepherd. The Commission's been given a very broad brief indeed to look at savings, job cuts and privatisation, amongst other things. And there are indications in the terms of reference that maybe the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, was serious when he declared the age of entitlement over. I spoke a short time ago to the Finance Minister, Mathias Cormann. Mathias Cormann, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Good to be here.
You've announced the terms of reference for your Commission of Audit. Is anything ruled out?
The Commission of Audit will be a very comprehensive review across the whole of the government. Our objective is to make sure that the operations of government are as efficient as possible, that taxpayers' money is spent as wisely as possible. So the Commission of Audit has a job at looking at everything across the whole of the government.
Does that include programs you took to the last election and you plan to implement?
Well, there are two different aspects here. I mean, firstly, of course, the Commission of Audit is going to do a comprehensive job as it sees fit. Then the second part of that process is, of course, going to be what recommendations the government will accept, having received the report. And the commitment that we've made very clearly is that we will not be implementing any recommendations which conflict with our pre-election commitments that we took to the last elections.
You've asked the Commission of Audit to look at savings, to look at consolidating, rationalising, flattening structures. That means there will be cuts, won't there?
Well, we are focusing on making sure that the operations of government are as efficient as possible. Now, obviously, within the same funding envelope, there is always capacity to spend money better, to make sure that people across Australia get better services from government for the money that they invest in government services. So really the objective here really is to make sure that taxpayers get better services from government, funded in the most efficient way possible, and we think that that is a very important task indeed.
But if you're consolidating and rationalising and flattening structures, that would at least mean that jobs might go. Would they be within the envelope you've already set out for losing public service jobs?
Look, we're not going to speculate about what may or may not be in the recommendations from the Commission of Audit. Let me just make a couple of observations. We took a very clear policy to the last election, which was that we would reduce the size of the public service by 12,000 through natural attrition. Right now, there are redundancies taking place as a result of decisions that the Labor Party took in government in various budgets and budget updates. So as far as our policy is concerned, our policy is very clear. It is a reduction in the size of the public service by 12,000 through natural attrition. What the Commission of Audit may or may not recommend, let's deal with that when we receive their report.
You've also asked the Commission of Audit to look at appropriate price signals, at targeting spending to those most in need. Is this the end of the age of entitlement?
Well, we are very much looking to the Commission of Audit to make recommendations to the government about how our budget can be put on a more sustainable medium to long-term footing. So right now we're in a situation where we've inherited a very bad budget position from Labor. The budget position is deteriorating, but beyond that, of course, the government is facing, in the normal course of events, some additional fiscal challenges on the spending side, in particular related to the ageing of the population. So there are a whole range of issues that we've got to deal with in a calm, methodical and orderly fashion. Firstly, we've got to reverse the trend that Labor has left behind, which is to put the budget back onto a believable pathway back to surplus. But then, of course, we've got to very much focus on the medium to long-term fiscal challenges that we're facing, given the ageing of the population and other issues.
It also says that where possible, the Commission should identify options to address budget risks in the medium to long term, including introducing appropriate incentives to encourage self-provision of services by individuals over time. Is that code for you don't really need the government's help with this anymore, do you? So you can fund it yourself?
Well, that is I think that those words are not code. Those words are very clear in their own right. And
so there may be recommendations that say to people over time, they don't actually need the government help they're currently receiving.
Well, what we do have to do as a nation is have a sensible conversation about what the role and responsibilities of government should be, because of course any additional role, any additional responsibility brings with it a requirement to raise additional taxes. And of course, moving forward, wanting to make sure that that our economy is as competitive as possible, that our fiscal arrangements are as competitive as possible, it is important that we ensure that our spending is targeted at areas where the national consensus very clearly indicates these are the sorts of areas that government should be involved in, and we should ask ourselves the question, at what additional cost some of these additional areas, come in terms of the broader economy ultimately.
Joe Hockey said that the government would not be breaking election promises, but did want to get the budget under control. Is it breaking a promise if you implement something from the Commission of Audit that you did not take to the last election? Say you look at privatising more things than just Medibank Private.
Well, there's a couple of questions there. Firstly, we are totally committed to repair the budget. We're totally committed to put the budget back onto a believable pathway to surplus and to achieve a surplus of 1% as a share of GDP within the decade. And now, what we have said very clearly is that we will be implementing all of the commitments that we took to the last election. Now, as far as the sale of Commonwealth assets is concerned, the potential sale of Commonwealth assets, the government has only got a policy to sell Medibank Private. That is a long-standing policy. The legislation passed through the Parliament in 2006. The Labor Party never repealed that legislation, and we will have something more to say about that very soon. We do not have a policy to sell any other Commonwealth assets. Now, as part of its role, the Commission of Audit will look at the roles and responsibilities of government and will make a judgment on whether there are some areas where government is currently involved, where government should not be involved. Now, I'm not going to speculate, the Treasurer and I were not going to speculate about what the Commission of Audit may or may not recommend in relation to this. But right now, the government has only got a policy to sell Medibank Private. We don't have a policy to sell any other Commonwealth assets. Let's cross the bridge in terms of how we would deal with the recommendations from the Commission of Audit when we actually receive them.
Finally, you also announced today that you're increasing the debt limit to $500 billion. You were very critical for Labor increasing the debt limit. You're doing more than is necessary, putting in place a $40 to $60 billion buffer. Why are you doing that?
Well, I mean, Labor's approach to debt and deficit was reckless and irresponsible. Wayne Swan first set a debt limit of $75 billion, then he came back to the Parliament very shortly thereafter and increased that debt limit to $200 billion, then to $250 billion, then to $300 billion. In May this year, the budget that Wayne Swan delivered already indicated that gross debt was going to reach $370 billion over the forward estimates, yet he didn't take steps to increase the debt limit at that time, which was highly irresponsible. We said so at the time. Essentially, right now we are on track to reach the $300 billion legislated debt limit by 12 December this year. So what we have in front of us is advice from Treasury that government gross debt will exceed $400 billion. We've also got advice from the Australian Office of Financial Management that there should be, in order to provide certainty and stability to the markets, there should be an appropriate buffer. So what we've done today is start to clean up Labor's mess. We've made sure that the debt limit that we're putting to the Parliament will be the absolute upper limit that will be required. Now, obviously, the debt limit doesn't equal debt. Our intention is to reduce debt. We've got to reverse the trend that Labor has put in train over the 6 years they were in government. Our objective is to reduce debt. Our objective is not to deliver $500 billion worth of debt. We're just putting a debt limit in place that will give the government enough flexibility to manage affairs properly and responsibly.
Mathias, Cormann, thank you very much for your time.
Always good to be here.